Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone in the forum room. That includes a number of municipal staff, some Parks Canada representatives, and members of the community in the gallery. I was happy to see that. Welcome all, and welcome also to those who are following on our Zoom platform. And thank you for watching to those who will later pick this up on our YouTube channel. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for January 21st. Councillors, you have before you our proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? Deputy Mayor Waxer.
Yes, I'd like to add an in-camera item under that.
Thank you for that, Councillor DeMora.
Yeah, Your Worship, if I may, if we could move number 10 adjournment to number 11 and make the new number 10.1 Councillor Waxer's land discussion, as well as land and legal for me 10.2, if that works.
Thank you for that. Any other proposed alterations to today's agenda? I will ask first then for a motion to amend the agenda by adding item 10.1, well, adding item 10 in camera, and 10.1 a land issue as raised by Deputy Mayor Waxer, and 10.2 land and legal as raised by Councillor DeMota, and moving adjournment to item 11 on the agenda. May I have that motion, Councillor DeMota? Thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That's carried. And may I have the motion then to approve the agenda for today's meeting as amended? Deputy Mayor Waxer, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. We have an agenda. We also have some minutes for approval today, beginning with the minutes of the regular meeting of January 7th, 2025. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Seeing nothing, may I have a motion, please, the council approve the minutes of the January 7th, 2025 regular council meeting as presented? Councillor Keller-Harapi, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And we have before us as well the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting of January 14th, 2025. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Again, seeing nothing, may I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the January 14th, 2025 committee of the whole meeting as presented? Councillor Hall, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Takes us to agenda item 4, delegations. Before we get to 4.1, I have had a discussion with one member in the gallery, a citizen who wishes to speak to us, and I will exercise some amount of mayoral discretion and say that it fits within a matter on our agenda. 6.3, the update on recovery relates in part to housing, and this is a matter that is always before council as we face recovery in any event. So I will invite Mr. Dietiker forward. He just had a presentation with respect to housing and has been here before and understands our 3-minute time limit, and undoubtedly will fit within that.
Thank you for giving me 3 minutes. In looking at all the options of bringing in the needed and required housing to help Jasper rebuild in a timely manner, I haven't heard the following option being discussed. So I'd like to plant a seed. It would be worthwhile considering having 3 levels of government work together to acquire leaseholds within the town boundaries from lease owners that wish or have to sell their lot at 2024 appraised land value. In doing this, it would accomplish all of the following. It would help leaseholders move forward without causing them greater financial hardship. It will curb the sale of leaseholders to foreign identities. It would allow the municipality and Parks Canada desire to increase density on existing leaseholds. It would develop lots in town that might sit empty for a longer period than we wish. It would give the provincial government the required return on their investment as they could rent out until such time as Jasper is on his feet again, and then they could sell them to get their initial investment back. It could help the municipality with the phasing approach. Most importantly, it would allow the governments to bring in the needed high-density, prefabricated duplexes, fourplexes, garage and garden suites where suitable onto service lots at a much needed and greater pace that Jasper deserves. Even 10 lots could equal at least 30 new dwelling units. And when we're talking about provincial government getting their return investment, if you do the math of $112 million and you divide it by 250 units, they're building each of these units at 448,000. I'm sure everybody up there has seen the numbers of the refit. A townhouse, $1.34 million. Some people are going to get buried in this and have to move on. As sad as that is, let the municipality take advantage and build the high density that Jasper needs in a quicker fashion. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Dietiker. Appreciate your insights and your willingness to share those with council. I would invite any councillors to ask questions. Otherwise, it's been heard and members of the JRCC are here and it can be a topic of continued discussion.
Thank you.
If you just hold on one moment, Councillor Demota.
No, I just wanted to thank Mr. Dietiker for coming forward here today and helping us expand our thought, because it's always nice to get new and fresh ideas, and I'm quite entertained by this in a good way. Like I think it's a really good thought process and response to a situation. We initially had discussed about a low-lying opportunity in what we call R4 now, right? Councillor Hall, the old term for the trailer court area. And where we even presented the province that would be an opportunity and probably work within the existing, part of the province framework that they had with the funding that was available. So to even broaden that to, think about what you just proposed could be a really good idea. And I hope that something in the middle somewhere could work out really well for our community. Thank you.
On behalf of council, thank you again, Mr. Dietiker.
Thanks again.
I will return to our agenda. Item 4.1, delegations, and just for those in the gallery, if anyone is interested in presenting to council as a delegation, I will return to this after the scheduled delegation with Parks Canada. So with that, Mr. Argument and a colleague, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Sorry, can we help make sure the presentation comes up again? Sure. Yeah, thank you, council, for the invitation to present on our wildfire risk reduction plans moving forward. I'm joined today by Christine Brown, who is our wildfire risk reduction project manager with Parks Canada. So he's leading the charge on implementing some of the actions that we'll be discussing today. So everybody obviously living in Jasper is aware that the 2024 Jasper wildfire removed a significant amount of fuel from the landscape surrounding Jasper, especially to the south and east of the community. The Chatham fire 2 years previous to that removed a significant amount of fuel further north and east of the community. But we're very much aware that the forest to the west of town, the Miette Valley, remains on the landscape and remains a point of concern for many residents. So the focus of today's presentation will be on the next steps for dealing with fire risk presented by that valley to the west. I'd like to start though by talking a little bit about wildfire hazard on the landscape, and just like to inform council that we do base our risk management decisions on science. We've done a considerable amount of work with Natural Resources Canada and the experts there on modeling wildfire hazard and probability on the landscape. So the image presenting here shows that the darker, more intense purple zones are those areas of the highest wildfire hazard on the landscape. You can see that blow up to the west of the community is certainly very much top of mind, but it's important to think about the inset in this map and the fact that the wildfire hazard to the west of the community is largely west and north of us, up on the Pyramid Bench area. You can see the Highway 16 heading west from town. To the south of that highway, those north slopes of Whistler present actually a much lower hazard on the landscape, and that'll be important. We'll come back to that a little further on in the presentation on what we're doing in the various zones around town. But we are very much cognizant of the intense darker purple blob there directly west and north of the community, and that's where we're focusing our efforts. Those areas of highest probability of ignition and fire spread for us. I'd also like to just briefly comment if the text in this image is not critical for you to read right now, but when we talk about managing wildfire risk, it's a multi-layered piece of work that we have to engage in. A few of these boxes here represent the actual management of forest vegetation and fuel removal and forest thinning, the work we do. But we also talk about the fire hazard in the landscape, the weather, the topography, all those things that we can't necessarily change, but we need to keep in mind as we manage fire risk. We can talk about the things in the landscape we can change, like the structure of the forest, thinning those pine forests, and doing that actual physical work out of the broader landscape. But we also need to talk about things like the wildland urban interface zone, the issues in town, the vulnerabilities in town around structures in town, the fact that we still have buildings that have cedar shapes on them and fire prone structures in town. It's all part of this package of reducing wildfire risk. And then further, a part of the puzzle as well is actually preparing for wildfire when it happens, making sure we have the resources in-house on how to deal with the immediate instance of fire, initial attack crews, and a workable and effective volunteer fire department in town. And then further preparing for things like evacuation from town. And I'll forever be proud of and grateful for the effort that has gone in and the joint effort between the municipality and Parks Canada to prepare us for those evacuations. The tabletop exercises we've been doing the last number of years obviously really bore fruit for us this summer with being able to safely and effectively evacuate people from the community in the face of the fire. That's all a part of this puzzle of wildfire risk reduction. And we'll come back to some of the other pieces that we're hoping to make progress on in addition to the actual vegetation management at the beginning of the presentation. So we work under the Fire Smart Canada approach to deal with managing wildfire risk reduction. And again, similar to the last slide, there are a host of layers to this, from emergency planning, vegetation management, Dealing with development, we've made some great strides on the new development guidelines, lately, with things like rebuilding homes in the community, be more fire resilient. As I said earlier, one of the important next steps is recognizing that there is still work to be done in this area. We still need to deal with, things like, I'll point out, harsh candidate infrastructure in the community, like our visitor information center. An important building in the center of town still has cedar shakes on the roof. We're lucky that it didn't burn in the 2024 fires, but we need to figure out a strategy to address that remaining risk of structures like that. It's not just that building, but other structures in town that we're going to need to come to terms with how to address those things. We need to talk about increasing water supply, and volume and distribution to make sure we can use other techniques like sprinkler systems that we know will have an abundant water supply to keep running in the face of a fire. I should backtrack a little bit. Of course, everybody who lives in this environment is, I'm sure, very much aware of the fact that when you live in a pine-dominated forest, as most of northern Canada and northern Alberta is, fire is a feature of our lives, and it's not something that we're going to be able to do away with completely. What we need to do, of course, is take all steps that we can reasonably to prepare for fire. But fire in this environment is part of the environment, part of the ecosystem, and is something that we do need to live with, but can take some very significant steps to help reduce the risk of the community. Education is important, furthering the community fire smart drive and things like that, making sure residents do everything they can do to reduce the risk on properties. It's a whole community effort, not just individual residents. I've talked to a number of unfortunate people that have lost their homes, even after taking the right steps to put on metal roofing, make their property fire resilient, but perhaps their neighbors didn't, and they still lose their homes in those circumstances. So it's a whole community effort to make sure we're taking those steps. But I'll get on to the meat of what we're actually doing with the vegetation management on the landscape. This is just a graphic showing, of course, the extent and intensity of the fire of 2024. The center there is the community of Jasper. And as you know, the fire approached from the south, ignited down near Kirkesland, and then took a hard right up towards the Moline Valley as it approached town. I think it is important to note that the early analysis that we're seeing has pointed out that, contrary to some of the narrative we've heard, Jasper as a community was not hit by that 400-foot wall of flames that some people have referred to. The work we've done previously, in cooperation with the municipality and other partners, effectively brought the fire out of the tree canopy as it approached the river and the highway, so that what we actually saw hitting town was that ember shower. And again, fire smarting in town is one of the measures we can take to make sure we're reducing the probability of fire taking hold in town, because those ember showers are very difficult to address other than to make sure that we don't have a place to actually ignite when we land. But the work we've done previously has a demonstrated benefit. It reduced the density of the ember shower, it reduces fire intensity as it hits the margins of town, brings the fire out of the canopy so that firefighters are actually able to address it more effectively. Of course, all that work, as we know, on the heels of the July that we had in Jasper this summer, led to a situation where the fire simply was overwhelming in its intensity. The hot, dry weather through the month of July, some of the hottest on record, a long period of being in extreme fire danger. So some of that work, of course, is simply overwhelmed by those circumstances. What we need to do moving forward now is focus on the remaining fire hazard in the landscape. And as you can see in this map, most of the fuel that remains in the landscape is directly west and north of the community. So that's where we'll be focusing our efforts under the 5-year fuel wildfire risk reduction strategy that Christine is now tasked with implementing. Just briefly, the primary areas of concern again, just to point out, we know the green blob to the west of the community is the highest, most important area of concern. That's our highest priority right now to work on. We are also aware that there's work to be done in some of the other nodes in the park where we see high density of visitor activities, business interests, and certain features of the landscape that increase the risk in those areas. So we're talking about the Main Valley, up at the lake, where we know we get high densities of visitors and only a single egress route. We're talking about the hot springs up the Fiddle Valley there, where we again have a single point of egress, a narrow valley, not a great road up that valley, and challenges of communications. So we will be working on strategies to address those, but I'd just like to assure council that the highest priority that we are addressing in the immediate term is that Niet Valley to the rest of the community as our first priority. I'll start out by illustrating the work that we have done over the last 20 years. So the colored blobs on the map here show all the areas that we have conducted fuel treatment at various levels. That might be forest thinning, that's the removal of those ladder fuels that can carry fire up into the tree canopy. And the paler blobs there, of course, are the large cut blocks that we put in primarily in 2018 up on the Pyramid Bench, working with Canadian Forest Products as the operator. All this together results in a buffer around the community that is almost 3 kilometers in radius. If you walk from Stone Mountain directly west, you could walk for more than 2.5 kilometers before you get to the end of the treatment zone. What I'm proposing and what our strategy is working towards is completing the circle around town. We have a couple of areas left and a few blanks to fill in, but we're looking at a bubble around town that will effectively be 3 kilometers in radius in any given direction from town, where we have conducted this wildfire risk reduction, vegetation management, to reduce that fire risk, to make sure that we can get crews onto the ground to address fire, to reduce the density of future ember showers on the community, and to remove that risk of an actual canopy fire on the fringes of town. So a 3 kilometer diameter bubble around town is what we're working towards, and I'll show you how we're going to fill in the blanks that are left in that strategy next. In the immediate term, 2025, this year, this is what's on the books and what is occurring now. So we're filling in some of those gaps between the cut blocks that were put in 2018. You can see that farthest western block, the Magic Ridge area. We are in contracting now, and we expect to see machinery on the ground in the next few weeks. By mid-February, we'll see that unit being treated. That's about 100 hectares of area that we will be treating intensively with mechanical treatment. So that'll see a hauling road put back in again that was previously reclaimed from 2018 work. And then we'll see logging trucks rolling through town again as we remove that fuel from the bench. So that fills in the biggest remaining gap there directly west of the community to further that buffer zone around town. To the north on Patricia Lake, we have crews operating right now doing the fuel reduction immediately adjacent to Patricia Lake bungalows. We'll be furthering that work with more hand treatment in that block, but also more mechanical removal is warranted there as well to complete that protection in that zone. The area on the Pyramid Lake Road itself, so the bigger blob in the middle, we have hand crews arriving tomorrow, I think is the plan. Starting work Thursday of this week, 2 5-person contract crews and professionals coming in to more thoroughly treat that area. That's an area we've gone over before, but we'll be further reducing the fuel load in that area to ensure that that block immediately adjacent to the community that is potential egress concern from everything up on the bench will be intensively treated starting Thursday. And then there's a few other small pieces, small but important, where we're working in the immediate zone around some of the outlying commercial operations. Again, the horse stables up there on the bench will get some work done this winter in the in the close proximity zone to the facility. We've also been engaging in work down at Pine Bungalows, one of the few remaining outlying commercial accommodations that still has some significant work left to do, and the operator there is working on their own lease as well on property dealing with their immediate concerns adjacent to the buildings. So this is what we have on the books this year. A lot of it is already underway, as I said, and I think in the next few weeks we'll be seeing that the Magic Ridge block actually seeing the more intensive mechanical treatment. Moving forward from there, these are the remaining blocks on the landscape that we're laying out and looking at. So that effectively fills in the remaining gaps in that 3 kilometer treatment zone that I've referred to moving forward. As we've discussed previously, and I think I presented previously to council, we had initially conducted the 2018 work with the mechanical removal with the long-term plan to then fill in some of those blanks and move forward using prescribed fire as a tool to push that protection a little further out. Given the current conditions, the changing climate, the warming winters and hot, dry summers, we can't wait for the right prescription conditions anymore to put this prescribed fire plan into practice. So we are moving back into the mechanical treatment mode here to get this work done in the short term. So there's a whole host of blocks here. I don't need to list them all by name. I think the one thing that I think is important to talk about and is probably of interest is those 2 units on the south side there, south of Highway 16. My feeling is that when people in the community, especially the western end of town, when you look up from up to the west, you see that north face of Whistler Mountain. And it looks like an unbroken block of fuel in the north face of Whistler Mountain. So those 2 white blocks there are things we are assessing and considering. How do we address that north face of Whistler Mountain? I'd like to start by going back to the fire probability map that I showed early on and just remind the audience that, again, this is not actually the highest priority for us to address. The highest priority is that area up on the bench where we know we get the hot, dry weather. The north face of Whistler Mountain tends to be, it is north facing, tends to be more shaded, wetter, less fire prone given those circumstances than the higher priority areas up on the bench itself. That said, it's still an important piece of that buffer that we like to draw around the whole of the community. So we are engaged in assessment work to determine what is it that we can do effectively here. The further west block, that was something we have engaged already in the assessment for whether or not we can conduct mechanical removal on that block, and we're finding that it's actually not going to be conducive to a larger fuel removal technique on that slope. There's geotechnical concerns. There's a concern of creating new hazards such as avalanche has onto Highway 16 where they haven't previously existed. And then just the practicality of actually bringing logs down off that slope. It is so steep and challenging that we'd be looking at a cable logging operation that even the cable logging experts, we've had foresters in to assess that slope, have told us that it's not actually something that is something that they are able to implement in the immediate future, given the techniques that we can use with that kind of terrain. So what we're looking at instead is that block that's a little further east of there, that is that low-lying area down along the river that allows us to actually remove the last chunk of fuel south and west of the community to complete that bubble around town. That is in our area we can operate in and reduce the fuel immediately there. And then last, to stretch out into the future, is not the highest priority area, not the highest risk area, but to complete that circle, we're looking at that block adjacent to the commercial, the Pyramid Stables there at the north end. Once we have completed treatment in that block, then we'll be able to draw that circle around town and see we now have an effective fuel removal surrounding community on all sides that will allow us to ensure we can get fire crews where they need to be when incidents may happen, that we can reduce that risk of an actual ground fire or canopy fire getting anywhere close to town, and reduce the intensity of fire, and again, reduce the ember shower density of things that might actually hit town in the future. Again, that area that is a little paler red all to the south and east, that's all area that was impacted by the 2024 fires. So for the next 20 years or so, we can expect that the fire risk in the south and the east is significantly reduced. That said, part of the principle that we're working on here is that whatever we put on the landscape has to be something that we are actually going to be able to maintain into the future. Those of you that have lived in Jasper for many years, as many of council have, are aware that in the late 1990s and early 2000s, we engaged in significant fire smarting work at the time. One of the flaws of that early work was that we didn't do it in a way with a plan to maintain it in the future. We did it as this is a one and done sort of exercise, and then moved on to other priorities. What we're working on now is ensuring that moving forward, this is something that we can effectively maintain in the long term. So we need to be aware of the fact that removing fuel is something that we can't just do once. We have to come back and treat again, as we do with community fire guard, where every few years we have to go back in to do all that brushing and burning and retreat those areas. And then just a little piece on some of the other future directions that we need to keep working towards. Of course, we need, as I said earlier, work on those fire smart issues in town and adjacent to the community, at the OCAs, at the HEDIT. The new development guidelines are a really positive step forward. But again, this is a whole community effort, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that there are still structures in town that need work, that need treatment, and we need to come up with an approach to actually ensure that work gets done across the board in the community to continue to reduce that wildfire risk. We've had a great working relationship over the last number of years with the municipality on all the wildland urban interface and fire smarting of the community, all the work that we have done, and we're looking forward to continuing that work moving forward. One of the pieces that we would like to see more work, again, is that water delivery, thinking about sprinkler systems for structures, control lines around town, whether that's fixed sprinklers or something we can rapidly deploy. High volume water movement solutions, I think, are part of the solution moving forward to ensure that we're prepared even when the next fire comes along. And we know, again, in this environment that we're never going to be able to do away with fire completely. So those are some of the pieces we're working towards outside of just the vegetation management strictly. And then moving forward in the broader landscape, we are hoping to see more collaboration with both Alberta and British Columbia on potential prescribed fire projects near the provincial boundaries. That's really on the broader landscape, the best tool that we have in our toolbox for addressing some of those larger blocks, if you will, out near the BC boundary, for example, over in the valley bottom near the mouth of the Receivable River, where we've done some work previously. We're hoping to put some larger blocks in the landscape in the future using prescribed fire as a tool in most situations. That brings me to the end of the presentation. Welcome any questions, and Christine, because she's the technical expert, so I may refer to Christine if we get into the detail of how we'll actually make this stuff happen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Argument, for that presentation. Thank you for sharing it in a public context so that our residents can see this as well. It's critical to a sense of well-being of our community to understand the plans that are in progress. I will turn to councillors in a moment, but if you'll forgive the pun, there is one burning question. You referred to creating a bubble around town. You once referred to it as having a 3-kilometer radius, and you referred another time to it having a 3-kilometer diameter. Can you just clarify how big this bubble is? or will be.
Yes, my mistake for using the word diameter. I'm talking radius. My math skills have always been wanting, but yes, I'm talking radius. As I said, if you walk out from Stone Mountain, you can go at this point, more than 2.5 kilometers to get to the end of our treatment zone. We hope to see that in the landscape surrounding town to a distance of 2.5 to 3 kilometers radius, so that bubble will fall there. And that's, just to be clear, that is not forest removal, that's not clear cuts, that's forest treatment of whatever is the most suitable and effective given the circumstances. In some cases, we're not removing, for example, Doug fir, some of the rocky ridges, which is simply not fire prone, that doesn't carry the wildfire the same way that the pine or spruce forest in other contexts would. So we're not proposing that it's going to be a 3 kilometer radius bubble of clear cutting, but certainly of fuel treatment and risk reduction work.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Councillors, questions for Mr. Argument? Or the technical expert? Ms. Brown? Councillor Kelleher.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Mr. Erdman, and thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. So the work that's being done, will we see to the west of town that 3 kilometers coming up this summer, or to the north? Like, what will our community see for the protection for this summer?
So when we engage in the mechanical removal, that is only something that we can engage in during frozen ground conditions. The equipment we put on the landscape requires that frozen ground. That's work that has to happen this winter. So we're in the contracting phase right now and anticipating again that we will see an operator in the forest in the next few weeks. Middle of February is our anticipated date. February 10th. Is what we're working towards. Not a guarantee at this point because there's always hitches and hurdles with contracting and getting the operators actually mobilized. But that's what we're aiming for. We'll see that large block to fill in the gaps there at the Magic Ridge area where we'll be operating. So there'll be some impacts on trails in the area, and things like that. But we expect to fill in that gap this winter. Again, the intensive hand treatment along the Pyramid Lake Road will start on Thursday of this week. So residents will see that on your way. That's a very visible location and certainly will cause some noise disturbance. There'll be smoke in the air as we burn the piles and things like that. That will be happening starting this week. And then other work, as I said, up on the bench near Patricia Lake specifically, that is already underway. That's what people will see in the immediate term for the fuel removal and vegetation treatment. And then these other blocks that are currently on the map with white outlines are the areas that we're planning and layout for, and we hope to see those being put in as early as next winter to further fill in those gaps. And then just to reiterate, as we've talked about previously as well, none of this speaks to the immediate fire preparedness that we maintain in Jasper. And I'd just like to point out that that is not changing. I mean, not changing for the worse. If anything, we'll continue to augment in terms of maintaining 2 initial attack crews and keeping a fire helicopter at the ready during peak season, things like that. All those pieces are still something that we maintain and continue to improve.
Okay.
Other questions of councillors? Councillor Demona?
I do, try to work it so that you can last. Thank you very much for the presentation and lots to look at and think about. I did write down the slide numbers, so I do have a few questions, but I don't want to take everyone's time up in case people want to get in there. If we go back to the slide number 6, you just spoke about, that's where we have the borderline. And you spoke of collaboration with other levels of government. My question is, I guess, to expand on the BC discussion to the west, we can, or you can have the ability to work to the border. When you talk about collaboration, you know, there's a lot of vegetation and a lot of pine beetle affected area between here and Dale Mountain and subsequently to the southwest there. In discussions with BC, is there a priority to start at a border and work backwards? Seems that might be a heavily affected area towards our community.
At this point, thank you for the question. At this point, we're in early days of figuring out what that might look like. We understand that progress needs to be made. We're hoping to see effective collaboration on fire projects there, but we're not there yet. It's something that we will be engaging in those discussions moving forward to address that fuel load further out. But there's nothing definitive on the books at this point for a fire or prescribed fire in that context. And I'll just say again that unfortunately, one of the limitations of using prescribed fire as a tool is that it requires very exacting conditions. So it's not something we can say, we will do this in 2025. We can't be guaranteed we'll get the right prescription conditions in a given year. So we will do the planning work and engage in that collaboration so that we have a project on the books. But it's not something that we can expect to see immediately. That's why we're taking the more intensive, immediate, definitive actions immediately adjacent to the community where the risk is the highest and the gains are the most significant.
Thank you very much for that. And then moving forward, I don't know if I have much on slide number 7, but I guess moving on to number 8, the purple area that's just at the very north of town there on Bear Hill, I guess on the bench. Just for more clarification, is that when you compare that to the next slide, number 9, where you're talking about reducing the vegetation there, the purple areas there, is that more than just reducing? Is that more clear cutting than taking that high risk stuff out?
So that block that you're referring to on the Pyramid Lake Road is not clear cutting. There is a lot of fir in there. What we will be doing in there is the hand treatment. So hand crews coming in to do that work, removing the ladder fuels and the fuels in the forest floor to reduce the potential spread for fire through that area. But we won't be clear cutting on that slope. A lot of that's also more steep slopes that we don't want to remove the forest cover from because it can lead to erosion concerns and issues like that. So no, that's not clear cutting, that's hand treatment.
Okay, so moving on from that, then there's just below that there are the 2 blocks that are from the fire in 2024. From what I understand, that was a backburn that was done prior to the fire or as the fire from the south was hitting town. Do I understand that correctly?
I believe you're correct. There was backburning efforts on the slopes above town. There were also a couple of ember starts in that area that did not go very far. It's not particularly fire prone. There's a lot of Doug fir on those slopes, as I said, and they have been treated repeatedly in the past. So there were some efforts to do some backburning in there to reduce some of the risk. But yeah, that's as far as those fires go.
All right. That's good, because I was very impressed at the containment of that, understanding that information post-fire. So, congratulate your teams on the efforts there to keep that from hitting the rest of town. So that gives me a little bit more level of comfort. I think from, the layperson in town not understanding the dynamics, you see the immediate threat as you're going down because you don't see a lot on the other side of the hill there. So there is a lot of vegetation there and not understanding, the makeup of that. It can be kind of concerning, especially when you're thinking about embers and the threat that that's posed on our community so far. So moving on to number 9, in that regard, that stretch that continues on to the top of the bench there, leading to town on top of those 2 blocks that were from 2024. That's scheduled for, winter of next year, spring of 2026.
I'll defer to Christine on where that sits on the schedule.
Okay.
So just to clarify, you're talking about the white section just above the burn perimeter on the north side of town there?
That's correct. Like that would be just directly, northwest of the RCP station, let's say.
Right, so in there, we would apply more of a thinning treatment just to have that anchor, as we call it, into the community fire guard and that burn perimeter. To just provide some discontinuity of fuel on that side of town. With the predominant wind patterns that we see in Jasper, we're more worried about those, that fuel sitting on kind of that height of land and then the short ember transfer into town. And as far as your question on when that's going to be treated, I'd just like to reiterate what Dave said. So all of these white polygons here on this map are areas that we're currently assessing. And so each of them are going to have a different fuel treatment that's appropriate for the fuel type and the area and all the other values that we're trying to manage in the national park. So that would probably be more of an extension of the community fire guard to just provide some anchor points.
That's great, great information to have, and I appreciate, your ability to answer that. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Again, thank you for the presentation. My question kind of leads to, I think the last slide was, there's some consideration of fixed sprinkler lines, knowing that ember showers can travel, over 5 kilometers, that 3 kilometer buffer is good, I'm sure, but how much consideration has been given to in the short term connecting, say, Cabin Fire Road to the Wind Road for easy access and deployment of sprinklers? And then I guess in the consideration of fixed line even further out west.
Thank you for the question. That's something we have been discussing as an option, trying to connect the community fire guard down to the Wind Road to make sure we can more easily access and move through that western reach of town. There are some terrain issues there, steep terrain to put a road into, those sorts of things. And then the challenges of working around the rail line Valley Bottom is never easy as well. Moving things back and forth across the train tracks at uncontrolled points presents a whole other challenge. In talking about potential solutions like the fixed sprinkler line that has come up previously, it is still something we are evaluating as a potential option. There are a number of challenges that would need to be addressed in implementing a solution like that. One of the things that comes first to mind is the fact that it's very expensive, obviously, to put in and then maintain the long-term fixed sprinkler line. And to do that, you're then tying your fire risk reduction to a fixed asset on the landscape without any guarantee that that's the direction the fire is going to come from. So I'll just point out that in the last 2 wildfires that we've seen in Jasper, the Chettaman and this fire 2024, in both cases, we deployed a high volume sprinkler line at considerable expense, brought in a very high volume sprinkler line and put it in different areas to try to address the risk presented by those different fires. In one case for Chettaman, we had it up on the community fire guard to provide some protection to the north of the community, given the Chettaman situation. This summer, it was deployed directly along Highway 16, but given the speed at which that fire moved, it was actually only operational for a very short period before the fire jumped that line and did the effectiveness of having the sprinkler. So thinking about putting a fixed protection piece like that on the landscape that comes at considerable maintenance costs makes me a little nervous because you're putting too many eggs in that one basket. What I think needs to be considered instead is potentially preparing the landscape for rapid deployable systems so that you can put them in different places depending on the circumstances and have the ground ready and understand where the water supply comes from so that at any given time and with any given fire circumstance, you would be able to unroll that sprinkler solution then in advance. The benefit of the fixed sprinkler line on the other side of that debate is that it would give you a tool that you can have on the landscape and turn on whenever circumstances allow, and keep a higher humidity, green vegetation sort of bubble that helps reduce the fire risk. So there's pros and cons both ways. It's not something that we can commit to at this point, given some of those concerns, but it's certainly something that is under evaluation. We're taking very seriously the potential solution. The mobile sprinkler solution is something that we have in the toolbox right now, and we're hoping to see continued improvements in the ability to roll those mobile sprinklers in a timely manner, including the structural sprinklers that the Jasper volunteer fire department who are making big strides in acquiring and completing through.
I have three questions for you. Mr. Argument, I'll start where Councillor Wilson just left off. You mentioned in your presentation about reopening some logging roads to bring the timber out from west of town. And previously, when there was mechanical logging, there were some of those roads. I wonder whether now there's a plan to leave some of those roads open exactly for the deployment of sprinklers. I understand now that Parks Canada has an equipment cache in Banff, which could be accessible. But who knows where you might need to deploy things, and better access seems like another advantage. So I'm wondering whether in the plan, there is consideration being given to leaving some of those roads open to allow access for future deployment of sprinkler systems, for example.
Yes. Sometimes I'm too long-winded with my answer, I know, but that's like, there is consideration. We're discussing that. We spent time and effort rehabilitating those haul roads after the 2018 work that was done, and now having to reopen them again. Of course, logically, we have to think about maybe it's best to just keep some of these open so that we can continue to use them in the future.
Thank you for that. The second question goes to risk, and as I understood your presentation, and I could have misinterpreted it, but you seem to identify risk with the probability of ignition. But I wonder to what extent risk can be also quantified by an assessment of the probability of intensity and the capacity of a fire once ignited to expand rapidly and overwhelm defenses. So not just the risk of ignition, but the risk of intensity. Does that factor into what you see as risky terrain?
So when we talk about the wildfire risk work that has been done by, as I said, by Natural Resources Canada, this slide that I'm back onto now, this is a combination where they take into consideration both ignition probability, but also the intensity with which a fire is likely to burn. So you can see the small little blocks graph. I know it's hard to read on this graphic under the word hazard there. That is that higher right square where we get into the deeper purple color. That's a combination of intensity and probability. So that is a factor.
Thank you for that. And my third and final question. You spoke about a 5-year plan, 2025 to 2029. I wonder whether there is any capacity to accelerate that plan, whether funding is an issue, whether there are other capacity issues or constraints, including planning constraints. But it just occurs to me that our residents would sleep better sooner if this could be unrolled in 2 years or 3 years, anything less than 5 years. And what might we be able to do as a council to put any pressure on other folks to allow you to accelerate the plan. We've seen what the plan is for year one. Everything else seemed to be encapsulated in one slide, and I don't know whether it's 26, 27, 28, or 29 work, but I'm going to expect that our community would be greatly comforted if all of the plan could be accelerated and be done much sooner. So how could we assist you in that regard?
So I'll start by just commenting, what we presented here, if I use the word plan, I should be using the word strategy. This is our 5-year strategy. The plans follow from the strategy, of course, and we're working on those plans. We're trying to time them and align them and make sure we have the pieces in place to do what is most effective. I appreciate the comment, and I agree that the sooner we can get these steps done, the better. In the short term, this year, this winter, we're working to the best of our capacity to get a significant piece of work done in fairly short order. What we'll be doing moving forward from there is developing the plans for the next steps, next operating season, what we can do for actual fire preparedness over the summer, but then risk reduction next winter, and where possible and where we can acquire the resources to conduct that work more quickly. I agree. I would like to see those steps taken more quickly, and we'll be putting pressure on to our funding sources and to try to ensure that we have the resourcing we require to advance the planning and the implementation of those plans more quickly.
Well, thank you for that, and rest assured, if pressure needs to be applied, I am confident that council will help apply pressure. So if you can let us know how we can assist in accelerating the strategy and the planning that follows. I think without question, council and the community will be supportive of adding its voice to see this accelerated. Otherwise, in the absence of further questions, thank you again for your presentation, Mr. Argument, Ms. Brown. Thank you very much, and thank you for doing it in this public venue so that our public gets to understand what is in store and what Parks Canada is attempting to do to safeguard our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
We are still on agenda item 4, delegations, and as I promised to do.
Could we receive it? Could we have a motion to receive the presentation?
Of course you could.
Thank you.
I would entertain that motion from Deputy Mayor Waxer, I think.
That council received presentation from Parks Canada for information.
Thank you for that motion. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So again, that is received for information with our thanks. And before we leave agenda item 4, there are some other members of the public in the gallery. If anybody wishes to speak to council about a matter on the agenda, you are welcome. And I am happy to recognize the Executive Director of the Clark Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Butler. Please come forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Worship. Excuse me, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm here to address agenda item 6.2, the utilities bylaw. I will attempt to be brief. The fee model reflected in the bylaw in front of you today has been in place for at least 5 years, I think. In that time, I'm not aware that it has been reviewed to really look at whether it achieves the stated objectives beyond simply raising the fees needed to fund the system. Specifically, is the model equitable and does it achieve conservation? It's fair that if the model is founded on those rationales of equity and conservation, you should expect the model to achieve those outcomes. So I'll speak of equity for a moment. The model penalizes large users, even though I suggest that they're generally the more efficient users when considering the overall impact of the system. And the model, in fact, penalizes large connections to the system, where large connection size does not necessarily equate to more use. When rebuilding or upgrading, it's common now to upsize the large connection, and that will be the case as the community rebuilds. For example, some have in the past and now will upsize to support sprinkler systems, which is not something that really equates to more use over the long term. Those with the larger connections are generally the more efficient users, exactly because they have a large connection where others would have several or many small ones. We can visualize an entire block of single family homes, all small users, could easily represent a couple of dozen connections and hundreds of meters of pipe. One large apartment building could have one connection, one larger connection, the same number of users. And so from a point of view of system impact, the larger apartment is more efficient system. And over time, is it the large water users who use most of the water? I expect that over time, it's likely that the collectively smaller users are the ones that use most of the water. Yet we focus the incentives on the larger users. And I wonder if that approach has been effective, or do we even know? As to conservation, when this model was implemented, it was billed as a conservation model. Is that working? Is there evidence that loading the burden onto the larger users is actually achieving conservation? If incentivization is the objective, why are we so heavily loading that burden onto the larger users? For the most part, reduction in use happens one person at a time, whether that's a homeowner, a hotel, I guess, or a small business person. Larger users don't really have more tools at their disposal than small ones. Conservation should really be everyone's contribution and not really focused on the larger users. Everyone should share the burden equally. So we recognize that there are inherent challenges, obviously, in devising an equitable system. The consumption-based system, as we have, is perhaps inherently as equitable as any other. But the aggressive tiering measures overlaid on the consumption model make the model, in fact, anything but equitable. They make it less equitable. If a consumption model is what council feels is most appropriate, then we suggest that we just charge everyone the same for the water, whether they're a large user or short, smaller. Water is water, sewage is sewage. Anything else just depletes equity, it does not enhance it. And then finally, I'll talk about the numbers and the timing. Budget challenges can be approached from obviously the income side or the expense side. The approach here seems to be entirely income-based. We see little evidence of efforts to decrease expense. One effort we've seen to help improve the bottom line was the bulk water station, allowing us to monetize water sales. But now that's cited as a rationale for increasing the water fees. So that seems entirely counterintuitive. Where we understand the intent of the bulk water station was in fact to reduce water fees, and it was used as a rationale for increase. A 13% year-over-year increase at this time is frankly hard for the business community. A 41% increase in sewer capital expense is frankly staggering. And the rationale for that increase, in particular on the sewer capital expense, is obscure. So I do have one question that I hope to have answered today, and we'd like to understand what is meant in the fourth bullet of the background, where that increase is rationalized. So to the extent that the increase seems to support increasing reserves, we suggest now is hardly the time to be building reserves. Sometimes you think of reserves as being a rainy day fund, suggesting that's rainy. So in closing, we suggest that the rationale for the required increases seems frankly dubious, and we ask council to pass a bylaw with a 0% year-over-year increase for this year. And secondly, we request that you review the model in the coming year with public and stakeholder engagement to create a more equitable solution, and consider just applying the same rubric charges to everyone. We think the price of water should be the same for all consumers and should not be tiered in such a way as to penalize the larger users. That's all I have today. I'll take the questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Butler. Over on behalf of Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce, I take it. Questions from councillors? I have one then, just for clarity. I appreciate your comments about tiering and consumption. That is the position opposed to the triple C model generally, and you'd prefer to see only a consumption model, or would you prefer to see just something that appears more equitable in terms of connection and capital?
We think we can, if the model was looked at and reviewed, we could achieve greater clarity. I would not say that at this time I have a specific answer to exactly to what extent, but generally speaking, I think our view is that the price of the system should be equitably distributed among users. And one way of doing that does seem to be, according to use a consumption-based model, and in that case, the tiering seems to decrease equity in non-users.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor DeVoe.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through you to administration, not necessarily a question for the chamber, but just for some clarification on how we got on this path and why we have these processes in place. First of all, from my understanding, I understood that we were underfunding our infrastructure and there was an increased demand, and as things started to progressively deteriorate, we needed replacement. A lot of that burden was going to be on the user of the day. And from what I understand, our reserves are so that the lifespan of our infrastructure in its replacement, we're putting away money not for a rainy day, but for its current maintenance and replacement, so that all users over its lifetime are continually contributing equitably into that portion of it. So I guess the first part of understanding that, I just want to clarify if I'm remembering things correctly through to administration and our discussions with council, and if you remember things differently, then please help me out. And then I guess, what were the inherent challenges that we were facing with our old model based on just consumption, other than we weren't correctly funding our replacement on the infrastructure?
Sure, Your Worship, for Councillor Moda. So first on what were the challenges in the old model? Maybe I'll take some of those questions in reverse order.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges in the old model, which has been discussed at public meetings previously, was just the inherent variability within sort of revenues. And so there's inconsistency there that made it challenging for administration to plan and for the municipality to put away the appropriate amounts, because there were sort of these ups and downs in the revenue. If I remember correctly, there was quite often essentially I don't want to say substitute, because our utility funding has always been separate, but the utility hasn't always necessarily carried itself quite as clearly as it is today. The other major driver was absolutely capital, and replacement is just a part of that. So certainly, we have aged infrastructure, as municipalities across Canada do, and we're starting to face the bills coming due, so to speak, on that aged infrastructure. Additionally, council will remember at the budget discussion this year that we have new projects that are of a capital nature that are quite substantial and not optional for the municipality. The one that I would bring council's attention to, and I think is worthwhile for the public, certainly useful to restate so that everybody's aware of it. In our 2025 approved capital budget, there's an item called Emergency Storage Rehabilitation / Lagoon Project. This project is a just under $5 million project that needs to be completed by the end of 2026. The municipality has applied for grants for that. But it is not an optional project as a requirement in the municipality's operating license approved by the province of Alberta. We are required to undertake this project in order to maintain our ability to operate the water system. So our water license would be at jeopardy if we didn't actually undertake that project. So that's an example of one project with a $4.7 million price tag that needs to be done by the end of 2026. And while maybe there is some grace in that, it is actually written into the things as, you know, for the municipality of Jasper to be able to operate, you must meet all these standards, including undertaking this project. For contrast, as I mentioned, that project is a $4.7 million project. Current at the year end of 2024, our budget documents report that we have $2.8 million in our utility capital reserve. So that one project is more than all of our reserves that we have for utility capital, and it is only one of the capital projects that we have on the books for the operation of the system in the next 2 years. We are, as I mentioned, we are of course applying for grants. Those are uncertain, they are competitive, we're hopeful, but we don't have any clear information about whether that will come forward. If we do receive grants, there will be some expected municipal share towards that large project. And so the municipality's responsibility is to ensure that we can undertake that so we can continue to operate the system within our license. And that's an example of why the water rates are continuing to increase. The intent is absolutely to support capital projects. In the past, many of them have been reflective of the state of affairs of our system, the need to replace old infrastructure. That condition continues. There still is old infrastructure that needs to be replaced. And we have this added project of just under $5 million that needs to be completed in order to maintain our license to operate.
Just to finish up on that, I guess, I appreciate the answer to the question following up on that, I guess, is what is our capacity or ability to borrow on that particular project itself? I understood at one point that 2026 was going to be this year and next year being kind of a crux with our debt limit exposure. Would that push us even further beyond what we're able to borrow at this point in time? On top of everything else?
Your worship, for Councillor DeVoto. So again, looking at our 2025 approved budget. And again, these are estimates that are obviously subject to change depending on interest rates and actual borrowing, but they are reflective of the planned borrowing that's shown in the capital plan. The 2025 remaining debt limit was $11.6 million. That's set to decline to 7.1 in 2026, and then further decline to $5.7 million in remaining debt capacity in 2027. So, you know, we do have some ability to borrow, but we don't have unlimited ability. And there are also really significant costs that are landing at the municipality's feet that it's unclear how we might be able to handle those costs. So there was a discussion of budget. For example, the municipality's requirement to pay 10% towards the disaster recovery program funding. Right now, our current application stands at about $74 million. And again, that, you know, may fluctuate by the end of the program, but for argument's sake, we are responsible for 10% of that $74 million. We could, as discussed at budget, we could start to set aside money now from the tax base by increasing taxes even further to essentially save it up for a rainy day in 2027. We discussed whether it would be wise to do that or not in the current economic condition, and administration has essentially put a placeholder for that contribution in the capital budget. We see it in 2027. I would not be able to scroll through it immediately, but it is in the 2027 year, I believe, where we have a placeholder that says that the municipality would take on debt, essentially to fund that if required. That strategy would ensure that we're not unduly raising property taxes on residents today to pay for this bill that will come due in a number of years.
And it would mean that the cost of paying for that 10% required contribution to the DRP program would be spread across generations of Jasper property taxpayers. So it's a potentially a more equitable solution. It does mean though, that our 2027, debt capacity will be significantly strained, if not, we'll be right there. And that's, again, setting aside any other priorities that may come up between now and 2027. So the municipality is trying to take a balanced approach. The facts are that there is a cost to providing municipal services. There is a cost to the response to the wildfire, and there's a cost to supporting Jasper's recovery. And absent financial support from outside sources, that cost will come due to Jasper residents and businesses. The 2025 budget attempts to find a bit of a middle ground, all of those things, deferring some things where possible. And with respect to utility rates, the administration felt that the recommended approach of continuing to fund off the operation of the system while building on our reserve in order to meet our required capital improvements over the next couple of years was about the best way to do it. Absolutely, the administration continues to aggressively work for that outside financial support, including applying for water wastewater grants, like the Levy project, which we have already, I believe, submitted those, the operations department submitted those. Anything that we're able to source from outside Jasper will reduce the burden on Jasper utility ratepayers and utility taxpayers.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland, and thank you for bringing this to council today. It's something I do here in the community. I also think this speaks to Alberta's $30 billion infrastructure deficit. And in 2023, the province allocated $722 million a year for municipal infrastructure, which is about $1 billion short. We've been underfunded for 15 years. I'm sure you would know this. You sat on council last term. This also calls for advocacy to the province for more funding for infrastructure. Communities around the West and the country are all about the same age and things are starting to fall apart. But those of us who were in Calgary for the federal municipal conference in the spring dealt with that firsthand with the pipes that burst while we were there. This isn't unique to our town. I think this is a $30 billion short or infrastructure deficit. And I do appreciate this coming to our attention. And again, I think this calls for some more advocacy for infrastructure funding.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the presentation. By Ms. Butler, we have the chamber, and I would ask, I see you're reading from prepared text. If that could be forwarded to administration, be included in the minutes, so that we, when we are going to get to a point of dealing with the presentation, I would like to see that we have your comments within our minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Deputy Mayor Waxley first, and then I'll turn to Councillor Demolo.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and thank you, Mr. Butler, for your presentation. And through you, Mayor Ireland, to administration. Am I remembering correctly that one of the important pieces of the connection fee was to address equity, that there is a base cost to operating the system and processing, billing, and that by having that connection fee, we were ensuring even those who may be away for the winter and aren't using their water, and even those who use a tiny bit of water, that they are all paying for the basic cost of operating the system. I'm not 100% certain I'm correct, but I wasn't sure.
Your Worship, for Councillor Waxler, that strikes to the system just as a refresher for everybody. And Mr. Butler's correct. There system has been in place for some time. I would say that we have reviewed it multiple times with council and at public forums, at council meetings, so. But, you know, it's not unreasonable to have another look and see how, you know, what outcomes are. The system essentially has three components. There's the cost of the water that comes out of your pipes. There is a property's utility ratepayers contribution towards the capital costs, like the utility, the lagoon project that I mentioned. And then there is a cost to the, base cost of having a system at all. Another example that's been brought up in the past is, maintaining, you know, the connections to fire hydrants, for example. I mean, nobody, you know, the fire hydrant isn't a revenue source, but it is important that the entire system is well maintained and that the regular checks of those by our utilities department are in place so that it's there when any of us need it. So the connection charge, the connection component of the rates is exactly that. Administration did some time ago, demonstrate to council, you know, how we apportion those costs about between connection capital and connection capital and consumption. And so we really looked at what the things would, expenses that would be required even if no one turned on their taps. And that's certainly something that we have and we could, present to council or share with council if folks would like to see a refresher of that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Gold.
Yeah, again, I'm grateful and I thank you, Mr. Butler and, the chamber for coming forward and asking these questions because it is a refresher for us and it keeps us a little bit more up to date and understanding on why those things were all implemented and my comments and I can't speak for Councillor Waxer, but I think it's just more for refreshing and getting clarity on it and just getting the discussion and understanding out there and not to debate the merits of the chamber coming forward because by no means did I want to make the comments and requests not legitimate because they are legitimate concerns in the community and I really appreciate even this refresher amongst us to get reacquainted with the system and why it's there and the processes of what are those three processes of the implementation are going towards. Thank you.
Councillor Keller-Ramsey.
Thank you, Mayor, and to you, Mr. Butler. So if I'm understanding correctly, Mr. Butler, you're saying that you would, that the Chamber of Commerce members, businesses would like to see some water, sewer be equitable to all, so that be a straight price across the board for sewer and water. And they're charged with what they use. So you feel it's equitable to all, so it's one set price for everybody? Is that my understanding?
Thank you for the question. What we're saying is that if we're going to use a consumption-based system, and this is not entirely, but I would say the foundation of the system is consumption-based, then we think that evenly applied rates is more fair. And to illustrate what I'm trying to talk about, respond to Councillor Waxer's query, I want to be clear that we are not arguing with the implementation of connection fees or capital fees. That is transparent billing and we're in favor of that. It's what I would describe as pretty aggressive tiering of that. So we see a connection fee of I'll give numbers, but a connection fee for a 1-inch connection is a great deal less than that for a 1.5-inch connection. And it is still just one connection. And so it's that where we feel that in fact, in perhaps attempts to introduce equity into the system, I think it's actually kind of gone the other way. So that's where I think there's room for a conversation. The upcharge for the misfortune of being large has become quite extreme, and I think it would be fair to look at that.
Thank you for the clarification.
I see no more hands for questions. Of course, Mr. Butler was invited to speak to a matter on our agenda, and the matter is on our agenda, so we will return to it as item 6.2, where there can be further discussion with administration and debate among councillors with respect to the matter on the agenda. So thank you, Mr. Butler, as always. Appreciate your attendance here and engaging with us. It's always helpful. Thank you very much. That does conclude delegations, since our gallery has dispersed. We have agenda item 5, correspondence. Nothing is on our agenda, and just for clarification, Mr. Given, nothing has arisen.
No, your worship.
Okay, thank you. That will take us to agenda item 6. I'm inclined to call a short recess. I think I saw an indication from Councillor Melnick that he was going to suggest that. In any event, it is now approximately 5 to 3, so let us recess and reconvene at 3:05. Thank you all. It is 3:05. I will call us back into session and we will begin on agenda item 6, new business. 6.1, supplementary assessment of improvements and supplementary tax bylaws. These were previously read for the first and second time and have since received certification from Works Canada. They are here for third reading, unchanged. Unless there are any questions arising for administration, I would look for a motion from a councillor for third reading first, excuse me, of Bylaw 264. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, worship, and I do move the council read for the third time bylaw 264 being a bylaw of the specialized municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta to authorize a supplementary assessment of improvements for the taxation year 2025.
Thank you for that motion, Councillor Melnick. Is there any debate? I see none. I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And with respect to bylaw number 265, so the councillor prepared to make that motion. Deputy Mayor Waxer.
Right, council, read for the third time bylaw number 265, being a bylaw of the specialized municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta to authorize the imposition of a supplementary tax for the taxation year 2025.
Thank you for that motion. I look for debate and see no hands, so I will call that question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That takes us to agenda item 6.2, utility fees, levy and collection bylaw 2025. Again, this has received first and second reading. It has since received certification from Works Canada and is here for third reading. Again, absent questions to administration, which could include the discussion we had earlier under delegations. I will invite any questions of council to administration. Otherwise, I would look for a motion and then we can have debate on that. Councillor Wilson.
Reluctantly, I did hear you, Mr. Butler, but as it is third reading and the capacity of administration at this point, I do feel like we should revisit this at some point, but be it that it's third reading right now, I would make I would put the motion forward that council read for the third time. Bylaw 266, being a bylaw of the specialized municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta to provide for levying and collection fees for the provision of water, sewer, solid waste, and recycling services in 2025.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Is there any debate on the matter? Councillor Kelleher.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and I do agree with Councillor Wilson, we're at third reading. I think it's very hard for us to change it if we're going forward, as we know, the billing has to go out and it's on front of us. However, you know, this has been a topic that we have talked about in the last 4 years since we brought in the bylaw, that we had looked at it. And when all that has happened in Jasper, maybe this year before this council is outgoing and a new council is in, maybe we should have a workshop for our residents and for our businesses to review this together. And we have had some workshops, but they've just been council workshops. They haven't been open to the public. And we've had them at council table, but we also had some closed workshops. So I think, you know, that's something we should look into for this year, and set up our new council and for the budget for 2026 going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher. Councillor DeVore.
Well, I didn't think that the motion would come that quickly, and I was kind of hoping to, because, you know, the current circumstances that we're in, and the, you know, the chamber does represent, you know, a sector in the community that contributes highly to, you know, our utilities as far as, you know, our revenues, not just on the consumption side, because they are represent some of the highest users. So when there's, you know, the question of, you know, we've come to the table at this time, I understand that. I guess for just future reference, again, through your worship to CAO Given, what's the furthest, what's the latest that we can make these types of decisions in finality before we get the notices out on a given year usually?
Thanks very much, Councillor Nolan. So I guess there's two aspects to that. At least one part would be, you know, we build the 2025 budget, list and expectations, and so now these revenue projections are incorporated into the 2025 budget. So certainly discussion around utility rates for an upcoming year are would be well placed at budget time. And so, so there's that aspect to it, but more practically, Director Malinchak highlighted that, you know, in terms of giving our customers notice of intended rate changes, administration requires a third reading, so that we can get the mail out, before February 6th. So we are kind of closing in on that. We want to make sure that we can get those notices out to, ratepayers, with enough notice that that change is coming, so that they're aware.
All right, thank you very much for that. Again, just for, again, not to cause further debate, but just for overall clarity so that we understand the processes. And, you know, again, I understand where the chamber's position is, and particularly when I was a little bit more clarified on the difference between, you know, the connection sizes of pipes and stuff. And I remember going through weeks of those debates, and it was not going to be perfect for everybody. And unfortunately, it's not a blanket save, for an example. And I think that there still could be some work down the road, and maybe not just from our end, but the users that might be facing some of those challenges themselves. So more discussions, I think, need to be made. Thank you.
Any other debate on the motion? I will speak in favor of the motion for the reasons that have been stated. But I will acknowledge that I too have long held concerns about equity. But similar to what Mr. Given said a week or two ago, it's hard to find equity. We quoted from the Supreme Court of the United States. I'll know it when I see it, but I'm not sure I see it yet And that's the challenge, but I'm quite prepared to engage again in that. And so although I am prepared to vote in favor of this motion, before we leave this particular subject, unless there's another council prepared to do so, I'm quite prepared to recuse the chair and make a motion with respect to having an opportunity to engage again in a broader but still selected way with community members. And I think we should acknowledge that Mr. Butler is here as a representative of an entity in the community that is interested in engaging with us, and we can provide perhaps that opportunity without making it an entirely public episode, and see whether we can take a look and find something that looks more equitable to all of us. In the meantime, for the reasons stated, I will vote in favor of the motion. Councillor Wilson, you're entitled to close if you wish. We'll then call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Is there a need for me to recuse myself? Maybe not. Go ahead, Councillor Calabrese.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I'm happy to make that motion that council and administration in the near future with the Chamber of Commerce and other groups that would like to engage with us on utility bylaw. Absolutely.
If I might, you said near future. I mean, I appreciate that administration has a handful with recovery and income housing in particular in the future, and certainly before the fall, I think would be appropriate. I don't want to suggest that we think the administration can respond to this in the short term, but we should deal with it. So, with that bit of correction.
Absolutely.
Is that motion not understood by administration? So if I may, the motion was, well, go ahead, just changing that.
That we direct administration to create a workshop with the Chamber of Commerce and other members that wish to be part of that workshop to review the current utility bylaw. Or utility fee structure.
Your worship, I think utility fee structure is helpful. I think that's the essence of what Paul was talking about. I guess it might be helpful to understand a little bit. So a workshop, from an administration perspective, so is the intent to describe the system and the fee structure to outside parties so that they're more aware, I guess, around the informed sort of category of engagement, or is it to engage them in identifying different options, or is it to meet with them and hear their concerns? So there's sort of a range of things that a workshop could look like. And council doesn't need to specify all of that, but just so the administration understands, is it along the lines of gather the existing documentation and show up somewhere at a designated time and have a discussion with people and present the existing documentation? Or is it plan to meet with others to review alternate approaches and the potential outcomes associated with alternate approaches? Because the first is much less complex than the second.
Second.
Okay. Councillor Moto?
No, I was just saying, okay, so we need a clear motion. Unless we understand what the motion.
I said the second option there that Mr. Given proposed that we need. We look at what currently is in our system, the procedure that we currently follow of the three Cs, and then, it's inequitable is what we're hearing from our businesses. So then we can work with them to find some solutions or ask them what they see as their solutions and how that can work into our current system.
as long as administration is clear with the intent and the motion's brief, I'm okay with that.
I might just add that from my perspective at least, the second involves elements of the first. But I would not challenge our administration or direct them to provide options. I don't think they need to do that. We just need to get an opportunity with the document we now have to have a discussion with stakeholders in the community to look at options that could arise, but not to direct our staff to come up with options because that's endless. But if others in the community have suggestions on how it might be improved to increase equity, I would be happy to engage in that discussion.
And that's what I said, present what we have, and then others can give us some of their input, and then we can look at that as council.
I'm clear on that.
Does that help administration in terms of implementing the direction that could be forthcoming?
I think it's clear enough for administration to implement. I'm not sure that it's clear enough for a recording secretary to record.
Right.
So if you ask me, Bill, do you get it? Yeah, I think I get it. Do I think that we get it enough that it is recordable for the minutes and for every council member to have the same understanding of exactly what's being asked for? I think that might not be quite there. So again, I think that the intent is expressed well, but I think the actual sort of like, how do we say that is a bit more challenging.
If I may, while we're waiting, I remember having this conversation years ago, and I remember by the last name of Butler going, it's very challenging to construct a motion by committee. And some things never change.
Deputy Mayor Wax.
I can try to see, direct administration council direct administration to host a workshop to review the utility rate model with interested stakeholders.
He gets it. I appreciate the concern.
Yeah, I again, appreciating sort of the overall intent, I understood that, and I think that motion is much more clear, like it's pretty concise. And so council can probably discuss and debate that motion a lot more clearly. Again, understanding behind the intent behind it, that I think was sort of shared before.
All right, we've got the form or the wording of the motion. I'm not sure who gets credit. Deputy Mayor Webster. All right, so that is the motion before us. Is there debate on that motion? I see no hands. I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So again, thank you, Mr. Butler, for drawing that to our attention. Can't say that it will unfold right away, but sometime it will. And hopefully after we have some interim housing on the landscape, because that is still the priority. All right, that takes us to agenda item 6.3, Jasper Recovery Coordination Incentive Progress Update. Director Park.
Thank you, Mayor Allen, members of council. We have, as usual, our standard update template in your agenda package. On the executive summary page, you will see that the first point on interim housing suggests that we were still in discussion with provincial and federal governments. Although to some extent that is true, as events have unfolded over the weekend, we have come to understood that the provincial government considers themselves to be at an impasse And so we are moving forward and planning accordingly. Obviously, still open to and in continuous discussions with the partners of the province of Alberta and the federal government. And as noted there, the request for proposals for, or the tendering for, potential modular units that can be deployed, will close today. And so by the end of business today, we should have an idea of exactly how many of the modular and mobile units can be available and will be able to be brought to Jasper and in what timeline. On the demolition permit side of things and demolition in general, it is going very well. Over 90% of the permits have been issued. Progress is advancing there. For temporary accommodations, we remain in total around that 70 households in total that are booked within the hotels, supported either by Government of Alberta or Parks Canada, depending on the nature of the employer or their residency. Contractors obviously have been back to work on the debris management since the holiday season has ended. And we are now at the point where some of a good significant number of the parcels are fully debris removed, and the post debris removal sampling has started. And so we are waiting to start to see some of the first results of that coming back, which we expect to see sometime in the coming weeks. So that is also positive news. The joint town rebuild team continues to work on streamlining the development review and approval process. They are working on community planning and policy, and they are continuing to have the open houses and the drop-in sessions for the public in order to be able to answer any questions. In regards to social recovery, we have a needs assessment that we are expecting to launch next week. That needs assessment has been prepared in collaboration with the Conference Board of Canada and academic partners here in Alberta, being the University of Calgary and Mount Royal University. So they have helped us design both the survey questions and then also the methodology, as we intend to try to get a representative sample in order to have a good, strong indication of the recovery needs of the population of Jasper going forward. The 6 months since the event, which the anniversary of that is tomorrow, is an ideal time to be starting this type of needs assessment. During the few phases of recovery, people are overwhelmed and generally speaking very occupied with trying to reestablish their situation and deal with urgent issues. And oftentimes you see that their understanding of what their needs will be and what the future looks like starts to manifest at about that 6-month window looking forward. So that needs assessment will be going forward here shortly. And in addition to that, we have the Recovery Pathfinders program. So this is a program designed to build capacity within the community to help residents to be able to identify the supports that are required across a number of different sectors, and then provide them with pathways to that support. So what we have done is we have created essentially 6 training modules in the areas of mental health and psychological first aid, suicide prevention, but also, for example, in terms of navigating the rebuild process and the permitting process and issues around insurance, for example. So all the first trainings of that Pathfinder program, we expect to start early next month, and then we will start to build up the capacity from there. Other bit of good news is that the food bank should be delivered tomorrow here in Jasper, and then we are just finalizing the utility hookups, and so we are on schedule there to have the new food bank in place in its new location before the end of the month, as initially scheduled. Finally, a reminder that Thursday of this week in the evening, we have a virtual JRCC open house where community members will be able to come in, and once again, using that same methodology as last month, we will have each of the working groups present and representatives of each of the working groups, as well as some of the relevant agencies like the Insurance Bureau of Canada and the Red Cross will be present to answer questions, any questions that the public have in regards to recovery. And then there will be an additional session in person on Saturday, also at the multipurpose hall with that same format. That is it for my update for you for this week. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Director Park. First question to Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. My question, Director Park, is around the sampling of removed debris. 8-week window, where does it have to go And my other question is, in your experience, are these similar samples that are required from other communities you may have served that have, endured wildfire?
Yes, so as you may recall, the Fort Mac fire, for example, there was a problem afterwards where there was actually health consequences as a result of some of the debris and the material that were grenade. So in collaboration with Parks Canada, we have designed a system where essentially we will ensure that all possible contaminants are removed from the sites. Because of the nature of the contamination testing that is required, there aren't that many labs that can handle it. That is one of the reasons why the extended timeline for the testing to take place. And this is designed to ensure that there is no residual contamination and that the sites are actually safe to rebuild on. As of course, as we've maintained from the beginning, our first priority when it comes to debris removal is public safety.
I will allow Councillor Hall to continue and then Councillor Wilson.
So a follow-up question, if a site came back with contaminants, what would happen next?
So in that case, further remediation would be required, which would be the removal of perhaps additional topsoil to a deeper depth, and then a replacement with clean fill.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, following up on that, just to speak to development permits and, the development permits and application of development permits aren't, hindered by tests and closure of, demolition permits. One could, apply concurrently for a development permit. Go ahead.
Yeah, that is correct to my understanding, yes.
Yeah. And then I guess just going forward, now that we see, okay, with all these demolition permits have been listed, could we then start seeing how many development permits have been listed and or applied for? Because I think at this point, last time I checked, none had been yet, but I'm sure they're getting close.
Yeah. So we are building out a mechanism to start tracking the development permit applications for the rebuild. We haven't got that in place quite yet, but we should have that for you soon.
Director Fark, just ask for some clarity about demolition permits for residential dwelling units. So there have been 319 demolition permits issued for 358 properties, and that represents 563 of 615 dwelling units. However, I understood that we lost about 820 dwelling units, so do I read into that at about 200 dwelling units were not residential based, that is, they were in either commercial property or other property? I'm just trying to connect that 615 dwelling units with what I understood to be the loss of dwelling units, which is over 800.
So I will need to seek additional clarity on that. My understanding is that there could be a few different reasons for that. Some of them might be linked to a combination of the outlying commercial operations. So I will have to seek clarity and I will come back to you with an answer on that.
Thank you for that. With respect to interim housing, which is topical, the report references identified site layouts that efficiently use the space of land that's available. Is that, and if it is not, can it be made available on the website just so residents know what it is being discussed?
So we already have maps on the website that show the locations of each of the parcels being considered for interim housing. So as indicated in the report, we are working now on the final site designs and layouts. We can only complete that work once we complete the tender later today, because we need to know exactly how many units are coming and exactly where they are going. So as that information becomes more available and we can finalize those site designs, yes, we will be able to share that with the public.
Thank you for that. Other questions for Director Fark? Councillor DeMona?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank Mr. Fark and his team, Director Fark and his team about, some of the paying some attention or a lot of attention to the social recovery aspect the recovery pathfinders. I appreciate that there's an ongoing, commitment to, mental health and first aid. And the peer-to-peer support. So I did bring that up as a highlight, early on, and, we received more details on what the municipalities, doing, and, some of the depth that's involved there, so I just appreciate that collaboration. The other thing, that I wanted to, ask again, just for a little bit more clarity, and I apologize for my ignorance. We have the food bank trailer again. Would you be able to repeat, Mr. Park, through your worship, where the location of that is going to be again?
So the food bank will be located adjacent to the museum. So basically on the municipal lot, parking lot or section, right next door to the museum.
Good location, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, through you to Director Park. I'm hearing considerable confusion around around the eligibility list for interim housing, and without indicating names and all that kind of thing, is there a way to provide more clarity to the public on how that list will be implemented?
Yes, certainly. So our starting point is the provincial government has been supporting a transitional housing program where we have put workers engaged in providing essential services, and together with some vulnerable population in the hotels. So that program expires on February 28th. And so our first priority will be for those people who are all under those categories and who are currently residing in the hotels. Beyond that, again, we have a prioritization matrix that is being finalized. We intend to bring that to council for your information next week. And so further information will be available then.
Thank you.
For other questions, to the Director Park. And if there are none, I will invite, the motion to receive the report of the Jasper Recovery Coordination Center progress update as information. Deputy Mayor Waxer, thank you for that motion. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, Director Park, and thank your team. That takes us to agenda item 6.4. 2025 Alberta Tourism Advocacy Summit. I think this was brought forward from the discussion at Committee of the Whole a week ago. That Advocacy Summit occurs February 9th to 11th in Edmonton. A good place for councillors to be. I can tell you that I have registered for that event. Are there other councillors who are able to go? Councillor Waxer and Councillor Hall.
I don't know if I'm able.
At some point, we will lose quorum. And it falls over Tuesday, so be aware. In any event, I mentioned that just as background. The matter before us is a motion to approve attendance of councillors who wish to attend, but recognizing that not all can attend. Is there a councillor there to make the motion recommended? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, we make a motion that council approve the attendance of any councillor who wishes to attend the 2025 Alberta Tourism Advocacy Summit, February 9th through 11th, 2024, and then, sorry, 2025, and then.
Right. Good catch. Thank you. Any debate? All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you. Agenda item 6.5. The rewrite of policy B109, fiscal controls and financial reporting policy before us after some adjustments were made at committee of the whole. Mr. Given, did you wish to speak to the matter, or Director Malinchuk at all?
Your worship, only very briefly, the version of the policy that you see here today, incorporates all of the previous changes that were presented to the committee of the whole. And highlighted in yellow, you'll see the changes that were the additional changes that were further suggested for clarification at the committee of the whole meeting. So you're seeing in yellow the things that committee changed. All the other ones have just been incorporated in the regular text of the document.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions from council to administration regarding policy B109? If not, is there a council prepared for a motion to adopt the revised policy? Councillor Demore?
I can. I move that council adopt the revised policy B109, fiscal controls and financial reporting as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Demore. Is there any debate on that motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That takes us to agenda item 6.6, development of recovery strategic priorities. I think this comes forward as a recommendation from the committee of the whole with respect to adding a new focus area. Subject to any questions? Excuse me. Which might be directed to administration or for a motion. Deputy Mayor Waxer.
Council approved the addition of a new focus area on wildfire recovery to the 2022 to 2026 strategic priorities.
Thank you for that motion, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Is there any debate? Councillor Devota?
Well, just again, to repeat a little bit of what I said last week, I appreciate administration coming forward with this and providing this recommendation. And I think it's pertinent, particularly with the next council that's going to be saddled with, doing some different work than what a normal council, incoming council would have to take on. And I appreciate the fact that we've set this up in the past to where our strategic priorities go into the an extra year, so it overlaps and there's an ability for the new council to work on their priorities. So mashed into that whole mix, I think this is a very pertinent thing to have on there. Thank you.
Is there a motion? Deputy Mayor? Yes.
So, yes.
Right. Okay, thank you. Lost track. All right, we have a motion before us from Deputy Mayor Waxer. If there is no further debate, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Takes us to agenda item 6.7. Property tax penalty receivable write-off request, again coming forward as a recommendation from committee, having reviewed this matter last week. Is there a councillor prepared to make the motion? Councillor Melnick?
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. I would make the motion that council approve the write-off of property tax receivable penalty for roll 006-841, cafe within Parks Canada Administration Building for penalties incurred in 2022, 2023, and 2024 in the amount of $2,866.40.
Thank you for that motion, Councillor Melnick. See no hands for debate, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Takes us to agenda item 6.8, 2024 property tax penalty posting. 3 recommended motions there, again, coming forward as recommendations from committee. I think dealt with individually by committee, so I would suggest perhaps individually here as well, but if somebody wants to make it as an omnibus motion, others can call for revision if they wish. Councillor Demore?
I'm not ready to make a motion, but just if we can discuss this a little further and from conversations in the community and further contemplation, I'm just trying to think of the whole overall purpose of penalties, and I understand that, they're there to entice people to pay on time, and, I'm looking at the ability for people in the community, to catch up on items, particularly, paying their taxes and stuff. There are gonna be a lot of challenges in the community, and I'm not sure if how the 3% increase is being received. We didn't hear much from the chamber, but just anecdotally talking to other members in the community, it appears that it might come across as a cash grab, and if the intention is to penalize people for further penalties, what's the difference between 15 and 18? Like that increase is quite high. Oh, I
I think it's
apologize.
a reduction.
It is a reduction, so I apologize. My past conversations weren't that well, so considering that, I support this.
Councillor Hall?
Thank you very much. I think, going back to last week's conversation, the incentive is to enroll in that pre-authorized plan, and, knowing my own personal life, when you are in doing pre-authorized payments, it's harder to get behind.
Councillor Melnick?
In the absence of further debate, I might suggest that I could start the series of motions. I think you were recommending we should do this as 3 separate motions, and I would agree with that. So if I may, make the motion that council direct administration to adjust the property tax penalty to 15% from 18% for 1 year only, being the 2024 tax year.
Thank you for that motion, Councillor Melnick. Is there any debate? Does anyone wish to speak to the motion? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Ready to continue.
Thank you. I'll continue that. Make the motion that council direct administration in respect to taxpayers who are in arrears for the 2024 tax year and who enroll in the pre-authorization plan by February 15, 2025, to impose no penalties on such arrears, so long as arrears and 2024 taxes are fully paid by December 31st, 2025.
Thank you for that motion, Councillor Melnick. Does anybody wish to speak to that motion? I will speak to, just to reiterate Councillor Hall's earlier comments that if people enroll, the tax rate goes down and get paid by the end of the following year, tax rate goes to zero. For those who choose not to enroll, the tax rate is still reduced, but the incentive is to get on board with orderly payments, which helps everybody. So I am supportive of that approach to incentivizing payment, which includes 18% greater of interest if those conditions are fulfilled. If there are no other councillors wishing to speak to the motion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Again, Councillor Nava.
Thank you, your worship. And again, I would move the council direct administration to adjust the property tax penalty posting date to March 1st on January 1st for 1 year only, being the posting of penalties for the 2024 year.
Thank you for that motion, Councillor Nava. Seeing no hands wishing to speak to the motion, so I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That takes us to the end of agenda item 6. There are no notices of motion under agenda item 7, which takes us to agenda item 8, councillors' reports. Councillors wishing to report at this time? Deputy Mayor Webster.
I attended the community conversation last week for children. And I'm happy to report it was extremely well attended, and I believe approximately 20 people attending, and very robust conversation, very informative, and I feel this format has really proven its value in this recovery period.
Thank you for that. Other reports, Councillor Hall?
Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland. I attended a library board meeting last Tuesday evening, welcoming our new board member, Brenda Shepherd, and welcoming back Kesson Park for a second term. The library is busier than ever, which I think speaks to a need for connection in the community with people all the way from young children up to seniors. And happy to report that the blind project, which you may not be aware of, just putting blinds on the windows because it gets quite cold in the winter and quite hot in the summer, is moving forward.
Thank you. Other reports? I will briefly report then that January 10th, I did a short interview with CTV, which has since aired. Last Friday, January 17th, I did an interview with Alberta Primetime, which I understand will air this evening. January 17th, also I spoke at BuzzFest here in the Library and Cultural Center, put on by JAG under the banner Creative Fire this year. Really well attended, a great event. Credit to them. I went over from there to attend the opening of the climbing wall offered by Rockaboo and supported by so many in the community, and it really does enliven the downtown. It's a great attribute to have in our community, so thanks to them. Last night I attended the monthly meeting as council's representative on the Jasper Community Team Society. And of course, this morning, as you're aware, Director Fark and I participated in a media avail regarding interim housing. Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to let you know that I heard a few residents feedback around a poem that you read at the JAG event. That was quite moving.
All right, if there are no further councillor reports, upcoming events, of course, we're still in Jasper in January. I think the street party is on Friday evening, January 25th. Can't say exactly the times, but an evening event as it always is. There is a work sharing webinar hosted by Jasper Chamber of Commerce. Tomorrow morning appears the job fair on Thursday in the afternoon at the Jasper Employment and Education Center. The Jasper Recovery Virtual Information Sessions, as indicated by Director Fark earlier in his report on January 23rd, 25th. The Tourism Advocacy Summit in Edmonton, as we discussed earlier on the agenda. And just a note of the FCM Annual Conference and Trade Show in Ottawa at the end of May, the first day of June of this year. For councillors thinking of attending that. And if it is necessary, given as Councillor Demota raised a week or two ago, our change in status, but not our change in policy. If councillors need permission to go bring that forward in time, and I'm not sure whether administration has secured any rooms yet, but might be an opportunity to look into that. Are there any additional upcoming events which should be brought to the attention of council? Go ahead, Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to add an event. It was it's actually two events occurring back to back, and it's events by Alberta municipalities, ABMU. On the 5th of March, the President Summit on Civility, followed by the Spring Municipal Leaders Conference, which is a conference I attended last year for the day and a half, where we presented a opportunity for a potential motion at Alberta municipalities. This year we're not presenting any motion that I know of as yet, but it was a good opportunity to see individuals within the government, and also to talk with other municipal leaders. One of the top topics last year was, of course, the grants in lieu of taxes, which has continued to be pursued by a number of our counterparts in a number of other jurisdictions. So lending support there might be appropriate, but I just want to get it on the calendar for discussion later.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Mellon. If there are no further upcoming events to raise, then we can move to what is now agenda item 10, and there are two matters under that, both being in camera. So I would look to a motion that council move in camera at 3:57 p.m. But subject to taking a moment to advise those who are watching on our Zoom platform that when we reconvene, with confirmation from Councillor Demota and Deputy Mayor Waxer, there should be nothing coming out of in camera that will require a decision of council. And therefore, when we return to open session, it will simply be for purposes of adjournment. So for those watching, they can consider this a day well spent, particularly the opportunity to see the plan protect our community presented by Clerks Canada. So again, we thank them for that, and I will invite a motion to move in camera at this time and put it into our viewers. Councillor Keller-Renty, a motion to move in camera. All in favor? There are none opposed. We are now in camera, and thank you all who have watched our proceedings today.